Peter Charles here, Folk to Fly Fly Fishing. And today we're going to do a video on the D-loop issues that we see when we are casting Skagit heads and the very short Skagit heads like we see with the Airflow Scout. And the types of D-loops we get, some of the problems we run into, some of the issues we have to think about in order to get a very efficient cast. Now, when I say that, a lot of people are going to say, well, I don't have any trouble casting these things. And when I look at them, they're doing maybe 60 feet if they're lucky. And I'm going, well, that's good if that's all you need for a cast, but what happens if you need longer? You can't do it. So efficiency is two things. I should keep repeating this. It's about being able to cast far with minimum effort, but it's also just being able to cast generally with minimum effort. Even if you're only doing 50 or 60 feet, you can do it very easily. I see a lot of people thrashing to get 50 or 60 feet, wearing themselves out. So in this case, what we're talking about, if you have an efficient D-loop, you can cast very easily. If you only need 50, 60, 70 feet, you can do it without knocking yourself out, which is nice. So let's take a look at the video here. And first off, we're going to start with the Scandi. And this is just a sort of an ordinary Scandi cast, nothing special, but we'll just look at it just to see the shape of the D-loop. Okay, we'll stop it right there. And you see it's got a bit of a point to it. I wouldn't call that a really pointed D-loop. There's some things could be better about it, but the point I want you to see is that right in here, you can see all that orange here is not in the water. That's the bottom leg of the D-loop. It's relatively light in the Scandi line, and as a consequence, it does not sag down and hit the water. So when I make this cast, there's virtually no line in the water. Now what we're going to deal with is we're going to move to a Skagit, compact Skagit, which is 25 foot long. In this case, it was a 540 grain Skagit. And I had an Airflow T7, 10 foot T7 flow tip on the end of it. Now, the taper diagram that you're seeing here is a bit misleading because there is a taper to it, but it doesn't taper down very much. The tip is still very thick. And it needs that in order to turn over the sink tip. So there's a minimal change from the end of the level belly to the tip. Yeah, it tapers, but it tapers very, very little. It's almost level line. So I'm going to make my cast. Unfortunately, this wasn't a very good camera. Otherwise, we would see more detail. But this is from about 10 years ago. So right there you can see the belly to sink tip joint just coming out of the water. And if you look, keep your eye on this area here, you'll see the sink tip come ripping out of the water as we progress through the cast. And you can see the whole thing was in the water, and now you can see it ripping out off to the right. And that worked out fine. It was a good cast. Okay, we'll stop right here. This was just recent. I just did the few days ago. I'm using an 18.5 foot Scout, which is a 480, and I got a 10 foot 50 grain tip on it. Again, the taper diagram is a bit misleading. The tip is very thick. It's almost level. There's not much taper. So let's see what happens when I make this cast. Now I've got a nice, let it go all the way. Yeah, I've got a nice point on that. That's a pretty good point on that D-loop. And for the most part, you can see the green from the tip. A lot of that is sticking out of the water, so the tip is not totally in the water, which is good. So this is a pretty good D-loop that we got going here. And you can see the belly to sink tip joint is, shows you that a lot of it's out of the water. Now here's a bad one. And this is really interesting. The fly lands just about off screen. The point of the D-loop is actually collapsed. So if we use my model here, what you're seeing is something that looks like this, where the D-loop has basically dropped into the water. So the point of the D-loop, the back end of the D-loop is actually in the water. And the entire sink tip is in the water. The leader, everything's in the water. It's an awful cast. But because of the Scout head being so have so much compact mass right behind the rod tip, and the fact is it's an NRX Plus 11 foot 8 weight switch rod, which is a freaking cannon. It still was able to make like a 75, 80 foot cast out of it. But I mean, that's not, I wouldn't rely on that. See, I mean, there's the entire anchor that we're taking up. And you see the whole thing being zipped right out. So yeah, I got the cast off, but it wasn't great. So here's another look with the same line. That looks quite nice. Let's break it down and have a look. We'll do it slowly. And you can see where the fly lands. And then, unfortunately, the D-loop went a little off screen, but we got a bit of a point to it. And you can see that the sink tip is staying just above the water. This is what we want to see happening. We want to see something that looks a little bit more like this to get an efficient D-loop. And we're getting that here, where we're getting just the front end in the water. And then as it comes out, it starts to drop. And that's one of the problems is I made this lovely D-loop, and as I'm coming forward with my forward stroke, it dropped onto the water. So even though I did a great D-loop, as soon as I started moving forward, all that weight, whoop, and it fell into the water. And there are ways around it with a longer line. You can put more energy into your back cast, and you can aim it higher, and it'll stay out of the water. You can do that with long bellies and mid bellies, that kind of stuff. And the whole thing will stay out of the water without any trouble. The back end of the D-loop won't drop. But you can't put a lot of energy into the back cast of a very short head because you'll send the anchor flying backwards. So, you are limited to the amount of energy you can put in it to keep it, up off the water. So you're really caught on the horns of a dilemma. Do you live with that dropping into the water, or you try to aim it up as much as possible and then risk blowing your anchor? That's one of those tipping points that we get with very short heads. So here, what I've done here in this particular video, in this particular segment, I should say, I've gone to an airflow 19-foot Skagit switch at 420, which is this one right here. And I have the, where is it? Here we go. This is the 420 Scout. It's virtually the same thing. I think it's a 1.5 foot difference. This is 1.5 foot longer than this. But you could use either one interchangeably. They're basically built to do the same job. I'm using a very old 15-foot tip that I dug out of a drawer. It was a nice bright green, so it would show up well on video, and it's 100 grains. So before I was using 480 plus 50, which equals 530. Now I'm using 420 plus 100 equals 520. 10 grains difference. Negligible, forget about it. So the difference, the major difference here is that previous setup was 28.5 foot long. This setup is 34 foot long. So, there's a, 5.5 foot difference between the two of them. That helps the D-loop just a little bit, and we'll see that. But I'm going to show you a problem I had when we get going here that has affected all these casts. Okay. You notice that hinge going on here? Unfortunately, that old tip, and I didn't realize it, had a very wimpy back loop. And it's hinging right on the point where the tip and the belly of the line fit together. So that's going to affect my anchors to a certain extent because it is sagging at that point. And these are the things you find when you video yourself casting, because you'll never see this. I mean, it goes by too fast. If you even had an observer sitting on the bank watching, they wouldn't see it. It just gone. So you do need to video to see these things happening. So that does affect the my examples here, but we can pretty well ignore it. You can still see it was out of the water. Okay, so there's the diagram, the Skagit switch, and you can see we got a pretty good point on that cast, and we kept most of the tip out of the water. You can see it rolling out quite nicely. You don't see that big rip coming off the water that you did with the shorter head, because I was able to keep a fair bit of it off the water. And here's another cast where we're keeping it mostly off the water. It does drop a little bit. You'll see that as we go, but it barely touches. So that's negligible. We don't have to worry. It's just touching the wave top heights. So we'll stop right there for a moment. So what was going on? Why was I getting a better result out of the 34-foot setup versus the 28.5-foot setup. Well, that extra 5.5 foot of line gave me a little bit more latitude in the D-loop itself. Plus what it did is it moved more of the mass from the bottom of the D-loop into the top of the D-loop. So what you're seeing, if I show you on my model here, what we're seeing is with the shorter line, you've got something that looks like this. Oh, come on. With the shorter line, it looks more like this. And with the longer line, it's looking more like this. And that difference is helping my efficiency. And I got longer casts. When you have that longer head and you can get a more efficient D-loop, I was getting between 10 to 15 feet longer in my casts with that setup versus the shorter head. When I was working with the Scout with the 10-foot tip versus the Skagit switch, which is a bit longer, and it had a 15-foot tip, just those differences in the D-loop shape and the fact I was able to keep more line off the water resulted in 10 to 15 foot more. I think some of my best casts were bordering on 95 feet with the Skagit switch and the 15-foot tip, where I think I was maxing out around 80 feet or maybe a little bit more with the Scout. Okay, here we're going to illustrate a problem that we get into when we're casting far with a short head. Now, this is not the Scout. This is the Skagit switch with the 15-foot tip. And I'm casting with about 3 foot of overhang. So the total thing out of the guides is about 37 feet. Now, this cast, this is a still picture, so you're not going to see the finish of the cast. But this one went all the way out without any problem. But watch what it looks like. Check what it looks like at the end. Now, that, better stop it there, sorry. Back up. That dent right there, that almost hockey stick shape, that's caused by that problem we talked about earlier with the wimpy loop. But the thing I want you to see is there's no forward loop there. It's completely rolled out. So it doesn't, where that dent's there or not doesn't matter. It's rolled completely out. And it straightened out the leader. Actually, I could see the fly going. So everything is straightened right out, and it's flying through the air that way. And you can see the amount of running line I'm carrying here. All that got shot out on that cast. Poof, gone. So even though it was riding flat, it still managed to pull the rest of that running line out. But the problem is that is a very big issue if you're trying to go for distance with a short head. You run out of head. The energy flows through the head and there's nothing left. And yeah, you'll get a few more feet, but like I did here. But if you're going for really long distance, these short heads are not the answer. And so we've got to think of them as being this medium distance solution. And you're going to run into problems. And this is a very consistent thing. I've got some really old videos, very low quality, really old videos of me casting a compact Skagit head on a 12-foot rod, and I was doing about 100 feet, and the things were riding flat like that, sliding into the water, running out of gas. Where if it had been, say, a 40-foot head, it would have had enough, or a 45-foot head, it would have had enough to keep on going. So, as I say, if you're looking for that medium-range solution, these heads are great. If you're looking for a longer-range solution, we have to be a little bit more creative and think about a much longer solution to enable the energy to keep carrying through the head and not completely go through the head before the cast is finished. Anyway, so that wraps it up. You can see that there are issues with short heads in trying to get a good D-loop. The weight in the back end of that D-loop tends to pull it down under the water. Even when you cast a good D-loop and you've got a nice point to it, everything's above the water, and as soon as you start coming forward, it drops. And if you try to aim high and try to put energy into it to try and keep it up at the back end, you blow the anchor. So as I spoke about in other videos, when you've got these little narrow margins, they start to get annoying. that you're going to have to live with the compromise. You're going to have to live with the fact a lot of the time you're going to have a lot of line on the water, and that's going to limit your distance. But if you can get an efficient D-loop and you can get a good amount of mass in the top of the D-loop, you can get that average distance of around 70 feet without working your butt off. And even when you go 50 feet, you don't have to thrash it. So even with line on the water, a good D-loop is going to do the job for you and give you that 70-foot cast, and you'll be fine. So keep that in mind. Let's recap very quickly. It's going to be hard to keep the bottom end of the D-loop off the water. The short, compact nature of these heads will help you to get that line out of the water. It'll help you to extract it, but it will limit you to medium distance casts. And if you do try to go long, you can run out ahead, and literally the energy will flow through it and will just fall out of the air. So that's casting short heads and efficient D-loops with them. And I hope that's going to be helpful for you the next time you go out on the river with one of these. So give it a try. Cheers.